being here at today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. My name is Eric from the Office of Global Learning. I'm here to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Adriana Campa. Dr. Campa is an associate professor here in the Department of Dietetics and Nutrition. Her field of interest is in HIV and nutrition. She's conducted research in Panama, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, Guyana, Mexico, and Botswana, as well as in impoverished areas of Miami-Dade County. She teaches a core course in global health and several undergraduate and graduate courses in nutrition. She's mentored over 50 undergraduate and graduate student projects and has published extensively with her students. Dr. Campa is the chair of the FIU Health Sciences Institutional Review Board and a member of the USDA National Agricultural Research Extension, Education, and Economics Advisory Board. Also a veteran Tuesday Times Roundtable moderator. We always like to have here in the sessions, and a great global learning professor. And I encourage you to participate, and when you participate, a request from our videographer to project your participation when you have questions and comments to each other. I hope you enjoy, and Dr. Adriana Campa.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for your invitation. Where else can you get a free lunch? You know, and this is important for me because I am a nutritionist by training. Then food is important for me. Is food important for you? Yes. Absolutely. If we don't eat, what happens? We die. You know, it's the most important exchange with the environment we have. And the environment is very important. I'm going to tell you why it's so important, because most of the resources that we get come from there. If we ruin our environment, what would happen? We suffer. Yes, we are going to suffer a lot. Humankind may suffer a lot because, okay, the maximum, what is a carrying capacity? Because the question today is what? What was the question, the title of this presentation? You don't know? Can you read?
Yeah.
What is the title of this presentation?
Has the Earth reached its carrying capacity?
You see, that was the problem with sitting at front. Has the Earth, our planet, reached its carrying capacity? And you will ask, well, what is the carrying capacity? Well, this is one of the definitions of carrying capacity. Carrying capacity as a term has been used in biology forever, and is the maximum stable size, in this case of human species, population that Earth's environment can hold for a long period of time. And this I added with quality, adequate quality of life. Because what is life if you don't have enough food and shelter and health care, and which, by the way, happens in some areas of the world still today. But carrying capacity is when there is enough resources in that environment to sustain life, in this case, human life. Have we been successful in reproducing in this environment? That's the other question. Very successful. So successful, we are almost eliminated any other species out of the environment. I love this photo. This photo is from the 70s. And I always ask my students, what is the feeling and impressions you have of this photo? It's an incredible one. I look at it and I feel pride because it's a beautiful planet. They call it the blue marble because we are blue. Look at the title. It's also our spaceship. And when people look at it, what do you see? You see continents and oceans and, whoa, it's so large. what do you see? You see vivid colors, okay? And that's one of the things that we are able to do by being alive. What would you see? And she wants to tell me what she sees. She saved you.
I see untapped potential.
What?
Untapped potential.
Oh, yes. Wow, there is so much water in here. Yes.
I see no borders.
You see no borders. That's okay. There is no lines there. They don't exist naturally. Borders are unnatural. Artificial. I like that word. What else you see? Is it in a space? Is it floating in a space? Oh, yeah. You know, some people 400 years ago still believed that we were in a flat area and the conception of the world was different. You know who Galileo Galilei is? Galileo made him say that it was not round and it had to be the center of the universe. Are we the center of the universe? What do you base your answer on?
The sun is the center of our solar system.
Of galaxies and galaxies and galaxies. Okay. The other thing they said when they look at it, and I was looking for it, it looks so vulnerable. It looks like a Petri dish also. It's the same color of Petri dish, by the way. What happens when, any biologists here? What happens in a, oh, you're going to be, what happens in a Petri dish when finally whatever culture you put there reaches all the resources or uses all the resources of the Petri dish?
They die.
They stop growing first,
Right.
and then they start eating each other. Then it's a vulnerable planet. And we have a growing population in it, of human population that have been so successful in not only reproducing, but thriving and advancing. And look at all the comforts you have around you. And probably we are one of the most privileged countries in the world. Then the world population have reached 7.3 something, almost 7,000 million of people. And this is from the World Odometer that measures births every time that they occur. And this is the latest, one of the latest numbers. The births today were 2,002. 200,002. Did I say it right? 202,000. Oh, wow. And deaths, on the other hand, today were 84,000 something estimate. Then we are not dying at the same rate we are being born. That's one of the problems. And by the way, it is a good problem because most of you who are sitting here today will probably live to your 90s and even into your hundreds. You are going to see the 10 billion people on the planet. It's because science and technology have advanced to a point that it have been able to extend our life expectancy, which is the name of it. Then death this year more or less were 50,000, and we are growing at an approximate rate of 80,000 million. Then 50 die, 80 are born. at a rate of 1.13%. Then are we growing fast? But not as fast as we thought we were going to grow. Actually, the rate of growth has decreased dramatically in the last 20 years. And when we look at how we expected to grow, we have seen that year after year after year, we have seen a decrease in the rate of growth. Then obviously we are doing something right. But the wrong part of it is that we are growing in population in the poorest parts of the world. And we'll see that again. Our replacement rate, by the way, is 2.1. Most countries now are growing at a rate lower than that. And if you see, most of the prognostic curves have been flattening with a very high rate of growth from the 50s to the 70s, and then flattening more and more. And this is 2050. We probably see even more flattening during these years. And this is a very optimistic forecast, because we are forecasting that HIV is going to be cured, and in those parts of the world where population is growing very rapidly, it's going to grow even more rapidly. This is what was forecasted if we have, I'm looking at the other. If we have kept on growing at the same rate that we have in the 50s and 60s, by now, 2020 more or less, will be more than 8 billion people. We are not, we are 7.3 billion. Then we have successfully decreased our growth rate, and hopefully we'll see more decrease and some kind of flattening. This is by 2050. At this rate, more or less, will be 10 billion people. What is the problem with 10 billion people? The more the merrier. What? Okay, that's a problem. And that's what is presented in the paper you have in front of you. And what is discussed today by two papers, one by the New York Times that has a very optimistic view of what is going to happen in the future, and other scientists that think that we need to prepare for the worst. Hope for the better, but prepare for the worst. I was with the table, just wanted to give you an idea. Most countries, Europe and Japan, are in negative growth, are contracting. And China, who's the most populous of the world, is actually decreasing very rapidly their rate of growth. What happens in China lately? All right, you see, I needed you there. Yeah, it happens last week. Would this affect that growth rate?
Yeah.
Probably not. That's based on the evidence. And let me tell you why. People who violated the law, which was less than 1% of the population of China, was severely punished when it was a one child. Now it's a two child. It's still a law of contraction. Remember, what is the replacement rate? 2.1. You allow 2, they are allowing just replacement. And one of the worries of the party there is that if they contract too much, they have India on one side growing very rapidly, and they have Japan that is in negative growth, but it needs resources. And Japan and China have a very long history of Japanese trying to occupy China, then they are afraid of contracting too much as a population and being invaded by their neighbors. That's one. The other reason is they created also by the penalties that they impose a punishment for having girls. Then today, and a reward for having boys. Today, there are 30 million males in China that do not have their counterpart female. That creates tremendous social problems. I mean, it's one of the reasons why they are taking away this one-child policy long term, but they still have problems they need to solve today. The other thing is that they have been very successful in growing economically and incorporating women into the economic life. What does do automatically if we look at the European countries and Japan and even the United States? What happens when you incorporate women into the economic life and educate them, like here, we have more women than men. What happens when you educate women and you give it economic opportunities, and then suddenly growing a child costs a lot of money? They decide not to have many other children, and many couples that will be benefited by this law actually don't want a second child. It costs money, as your parents can tell you. Almost $250,000 to bring you just to college age and to prepare you for life to produce by yourself. Then that's one of the reasons why, without a one-child policy, most European countries are contracting. We are decreasing the number of our families, and we see that flattening of the growth curve. And have nothing to do with coercive laws. But even if they liberate that, this is not going to change. On the other hand, look at this. And look at the fertility rate there. Remember 2.1? This is 2.5 in India. India is bound to become the most populous country in the world in probably 10 to 20 years. Yeah.
Do you know if religion affects
Religion may affect it. Actually, the strongest predictor of growth is a negative reason. It's poverty. If women without education, women without the right to say no, and religion has a lot to do with it, then it could be religious, but it's also poverty. Because in countries that have some economic, European countries are religious, and Japan is a very religious country also. But you see them contracting. Is economics, is education of women, is having control of their own body and their fertility. What makes the difference? Yes?
I saw this documentary, or not documentary, but a Vice doc thing that said that in India, a lot of the women have so many children because in order to like get money, or they house their bodies for other parents in the United States or somewhere who want to have children. So they do in vitro, where they have they're called surrogates. They're surrogates, exactly. And a lot of them, since they kind of just want to push out babies, a lot of them end up having like two instead of one, but the person only wanted one, so left with an extra one. And it's kind of...
But the extra one comes to the United States. By the way, we are growing by immigration, not by birth. Yeah.
They end up having to stay there and having to like stay with them, and there's so many people there, and it just kind of keeps repeating itself.
All right, but before that, and even before any connection to the West, India in the rural areas is growing very aggressively. And there are reasons for that. One of them is they have 40% of their children have malnutrition. And that's a worry for the Indian government, because if half of your children, which is the future human resources, and if you have ever been in my class, you know that the most important resource of a country is people. People and educated people. If half of your, and people cannot learn if they don't have adequate nutrition. That's another point in my class because I do nutrition. For a child to develop appropriately and being able to be educated, you have to have adequate nutrition. Malnutrition produces losses in biological and psychological power. And that's very important. And India is growing in their poverty areas, in their rural areas, in areas where women have no education, and in areas where women cannot say no because they don't have power. And if you don't have economic power, you don't have power, period. Yes?
Wouldn't you say that where because people don't have the education and the resources, they tend to have more kids anyway, even though they are low income, but
Several reasons. First of all, they don't know how to use contraceptive. They don't have access to them. They cannot say no. Their quality of life is really low. Then, come on, sex is entertainment. And they need more children if they want one to survive to adulthood. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many children in the past in the United States. Most of the United States 100 or 200 years ago was rural, and they needed hands to work in agriculture. And if you wanted 5 to go to adulthood, then they can maintain your husband and you, and this is a problem in China also now. You wanted to have at least 5 of them living to adulthood, then you had 10. And the size of the family 200 years ago was almost 10. The size of the family at the beginning of the last century was 5. Then you have 3 children, and you have those children to maintain you in adulthood. There was no Social Security and Medicare at that time. And that's a problem in China. There is no Social Security and Medicare. They have contracted the population to a point that we have 30 million men without women that are not going to have children, and they have no way to be maintained when they get to old age. And by the way, the age, the life expectancy in China is as good as in the United States. Then they probably, by the end of the century, will have a lot of people. Then the good reason for population growing so rapidly is that we are not dying. And we have doubled our life expectancy in the last 200 years. I like this statistic. We are historically the first generation that have half of the 65 years old that have existed during the 200,000 years of humankind. Why? Because life expectancy over 65 was not seemingly at all. And we are going to have 25% of our population in that age range by 2025. Then we have good and bad. Then Indonesia is another country that is growing very rapidly still. But if you look at Russia, Japan, Germany, and even the United States, we are under 2.1. We are under preservation. We are contracting at some point. And I put 2 numbers for the United States because of the 3 largest countries. We are the one growing more rapidly by immigration. Actually, India is contracted by immigration, 300,000 a year. While we are, and by the way, we have restricted our immigration tremendously. At the beginning of the century, we were growing almost 2 million a year by immigration. Now we are growing 1 million a year. And we probably, it will become even less in the future, probably, if we look at what is happening. Again, this is a scientific reality. We are growing, our population growing in the poorest parts of the country. And it's growing without the benefits of good indicators of quality of life. And what is the reason for this? Well, one of the things is those places don't have adequate resources. We see that population growth degrades the environment. It produces hunger, and that's why we are having hunger. We are having hunger now in the world, not because we are not capable of producing enough food. If you hear Hank, where I'm going to introduce him when I finish, we are producing enough food for 11 billion people. On the other hand, what happens is rich countries consume much more than poor countries. And when there is hunger, there is poverty, because if we expose our human resources to hunger, the ability to be educated and break this circle of poverty is much less. Not impossible, but much less. If we want to eradicate hunger, we need to eradicate poverty. And that's something that is actually proposed in one of the articles, but in the midst of wars and political instability, that might be very unrealistic in many parts of the world. Then the other thing is global warming. Do you really think there is global warming? Who said no? Okay, we have one. Who said yes? It's a little low. There is no global warming. On the other hand, we are losing fertile lands. And some of it is because of the changes in temperature. And that is something that is measurable. And we have seen this in the United States. By the way, global warming started in Europe long before ever came to the United States. For almost 10 years, the Europeans were saying, we are warming, we are losing lands, there's a lot of climate distress here, but we didn't have any. Then, many people believed there was no global warming. We were producing the same, we were doing the same that we were doing before. Now, what happens this year? That tells you that there might be some. Okay, I can tell you. We have hurricanes, the largest hurricanes in history. And hurricanes are fed by warm waters, by the way. We should all be experts in hurricanes. You know, this is hurricane land. Yeah. We have tremendous droughts. Those do more damage to food production than hurricanes or flooding. Yes.
But then we're also running out of water. Think about Spain right now, it's dry.
Correct. And we have the droughts in California and Texas, the worst historically. And all this flooding that we have is not going to make up for the water that we need. Let me tell you what's the problem with California. While the center of the United States is the breadbasket of the world, and we produce enough food to feed all of us and to feed the rest of the world, California is the producer of everything else. The grains are producing in the center, but California is the one that produces the greens, the fruits, the vegetables. If California doesn't have water, our diet and quality of our diet is going to suffer tremendously. Then the other factor that is really worrisome is the fact that because of all these natural disasters, our ability to produce food immediately for the market in an increased demand environment, because as you heard, China and India are getting richer, and they are growing economically very aggressively. Not now, China, you know, they have some economic problems, but they still are growing at a rate of 6% of GNP, which is a high growth for us. We grow 1, 2, 3%. We are growing very rapidly. But by comparison, India is the country that economically is growing more, is growing unevenly without equity. On the other hand, it's putting more demand on food like China is doing. Then we have in a place of higher demand, our capacity to produce food in the last 3-4 years have decreased, and have decreased because of changes in climate. And as a result, we have spikes in food prices, 3 big spikes in food prices, in commodity prices, which make more difficult for poor people to be able to eat. Poor people, most of their budget goes to food, compared to rich people like us that spend like 10% of our budget in food, and eat more than what we need. We can even afford a free lunch. Okay? But as you saw in that list, corn yields were off a few percentage points in China, Brazil, and France. Russia also suffered losses in crops. And we are headed for another increase. And these are, by the way, I put the reference there because these are New York Times articles also, and that gives the name to this talk. Northern countries actually have some gains. If you look at Greenland, for example, some of the layers of glaciers have melted, and now they have land to do some development and some agriculture that never had before. But in total, all countries, the extra carbon dioxide that humans are putting into the air acted as a fertilizer that encouraged plants' growth. Then not all have been losses. On the other hand, if you put too much carbon in the environment, what happens? The greenhouse gas. And what happens when you put too much greenhouse gas in the environment? It heats up even more. Then some people were able to use that extra CO2, but unfortunately, putting more CO2 in the environment makes seas and atmosphere to get hotter. Temperature, the problem is that temperature increases are expected to accelerate in incoming decades, making it likely that the challenges to food production will grow. And this is a real concern because we have, using technology, we have been able to double the outputs that we have in the 50s. We have the Green Revolution, and before the Green Revolution, we have the Industrial Revolution that actually gave us all these machines to move food and produce food. We need another revolution, technological revolution, if we are going to double the amount of food that we need to produce by the end of this century.
Reading some website, the vegan and vegetarian, and they do point to some problem of the environment towards the the animals and how the amount that we put into that and the factoring all those things. Do you see that as an impact as well?
Yes, actually, the World Health Organization have something about meat last week. And of course, we have a powerful meat council that immediately reacted to it and said, that's not true. This is like the temperature thing, people are invented these things to make their careers there. World Health Organization have recommendations on protein, which is the most expensive and unsustainable part of our diet for the environment. They have recommendations on protein to decrease it to 10% of the total calories in daily basis. We don't. Correct. The advice is eat low in the food chain to make it really compressed as an advice. But protein is costly to the environment. Protein is costly to your pocket. And protein is costly to your health. I have been, in this case, the World Health Organization last week associated it high meat diets associated with cancer. But before we know that it had been associated with cardiovascular disease, which is the main killer of Americans and people in the world, then the lower you eat in the food chain, the better the more sustainable you eat for the environment and the healthier you eat for yourself. Yes?
In the United States, because like the cancer was associated in the United States because the way they feed the animals, that created,
They put hormones there.
and other pathogens, so that's why there's increase in cancer from proteins. Or if you compare that to Argentina, where more meat is eaten, there's less cancer there.
Well, and as you can say, the way we accelerate the growth of animals is probably what is causing cancer, not the meat itself, and you can make a case for that. On the other hand, when we look at survivals in different countries by different type of diets, most epidemiological studies tells you that people who eat more vegetarian actually live longer. And this is have been seen in rat studies, in mice studies, in which if you actually decrease the amount of protein, increase the lifespan of the animal. And the reason for that is when you eat too much protein, here is too much protein. When you are a child, you need more protein than when you are adults. When you reach adulthood and you eat too much protein, you have too much nitrogen products circulated. And those nitrogen products are carcinogenic. Ammonia and BUN, then you get, they call it nitrogen overload. And that might be related to cancer. It's not only what you put in the animals to grow it, but also, this is another lecture, by the way. Yeah. Why, I ask, why is a problem? We have rapidly rising food demand in Asia. And this is India and China specifically because they are growing economically. Government mandates to use crop for biofuel. That's another lecture because one of the things we want to do as, for fuels is we wanted to make it sustainable, not extractable. And then we use big fields to produce sugar and corn that is converted in gasohol. And this is a big field of research right now, how to produce fuel in a sustainable way. Then we don't have to extract it. And of course, the problem is extreme weather, droughts and floods and hurricanes and all these things that are happening in larger amounts and with more strength that can change the productivity of the places. Then what is the cause of those changes? Climate change, for example, is costing consumer and food companies around $60 million, $60 billion, $60,000 million. I emphasize that because the metric system and the English system have different concepts of billions. The demand for wheat, rice, corn, and soybean is inflexible. The losses from climate changes probably accounted for prices increases of about 6% of these major commodities that are the staple in poor countries, forecasting a reduction of food production by 2% per decade is in the next century. Then it's not a bright future if you consider all these things. On the other hand, there are people that think, the optimists, let me see if I have them. This is how climate change affects food supply, and the fact that we have already 2 spikes of food prices. That is really worrisome because I told you before, poor people are the ones that are going to suffer the most. And most of the large producing countries are the ones having extreme changes in climate. And it might be because intensive agriculture or industrial agriculture can cause damage to the environment. Then we have tinkered with nature too much to the point that we are making changes, I would say, unexpected changes that might affect later. And this is something that you can see almost in every attempt we do to use technology. Technology might change things in ways that we cannot foresee. Then can humans change the Earth's carrying capacity? Now this is the optimistic view. Well, we have done it in the past many times, actually. The natural carrying capacity of the Earth in the prehistoric times was no more than 100 million people. If we have not introduced agriculture, by the time we were 100 million people, which is 1/3 of the United States population, we would have overwhelmed the environment and killed everything that we needed to use. But the technologies of the paleontologic man actually changed that to increase the production. The rise of agriculture enabled even greater population growth. And you'll see, when you see Hank, he will show a map of how the population have grown and how most of the growth have been in the last 200 years and how we doubled the amount from of the population from the 50s to today. Then we have accelerated our growth because we had the technology to do so. And one of the things that we did is that because we were able to double our food production, we were able to double our population. That's what today we can sustain 7.3. Then this is the optimistic view from the New York Times, by the way, 2013. And they said that if we have the necessary investment in infrastructure, if we have conducive trade, which we don't, by the way, especially in the Pacific, anti-poverty investments, we need to do more. What they said, if we eradicate poverty, we probably can move forward and have more people, because people will be more productive and educated, and they will by themselves, without coercion, actually tinkle with their fertility and decide if they can have 1, 2, or 3 children. And of course, more food security policies, and by the way, even in the United States, we have a section of the population who's food insecure. And food insecure is a level higher than hunger, but it's still a condition that decreases quality of life tremendously because it produces anxiety, depression, and obesity, by the way. It is obesity. We call it the obesity paradox. People have so much anxiety trying to think where the next food is going to come from that they will eat and eat and eat and never stop. And then we see a lot of obesity in very poor sections of the population. Then the optimistic thinking is that, yes, we can change the carrying capacity of the Earth. We have done it in the past. We can do it in the future. Technology is all powerful and miracle. A big miracle to increase our population. And by the way, there are ways to do it. We haven't tapped, and every time I say this, people look at me like, what are you thinking? But we haven't tapped eating insects, which, by the way, they are very high protein. And we are doing that. Most of the farm animals and most of the fisheries now are fed by insect powder that is already produced in the United States. And they are and many civilizations have eaten insect in the past. I was working in Botswana, and they use mopani, which is an insect that is very high in protein, and they like it a lot. I never, they fry it and put it in pizza, by the way, and look like herrings. This is something that was created by 28 scientists. It's called the planetary boundaries, and the things that keep us alive as a human species. And they look at the things like fresh water use. We were talking about fresh water, and geochemical flows, and they are looking at both nitrogen and phosphorus and also carbon. Ocean acidification, which is produced by carbon dioxide, atmospheric aerosol, climate change. But one thing they are looking at is biosphere integrity, and it's that other types of species, the rate we have been eliminating them. Then the controversy is, can or cannot we change the carrying capacity of the planet? And remember, we are limited by the fact that we haven't been able to jump to other planets yet. We will, eventually. We are an infective organism, and we will be able to, at some point, we need to infect other species. Although, as children of the Earth, we are very much a representation of the planet, chemically and biologically, and that makes it very difficult to adapt to other planets. But we have been able to adapt to almost any environment, and if we are able to jump, we will. And here you're going to have a 10-minute YouTube, if we can put it.
So I assume you know that there's a lot of people on this planet. As of last week, Wednesday, I think, was when we turned over to 7. Nobody knows, but nobody knows exactly how many people there are. It's kind of hard to keep track. It's a big planet. But there are about 7 billion people on the Earth right now. And they keep getting born all the time. In fact, for every 2 people who die, about 4 are born. Every second, there are about 4 babies introducing themselves to this world, and there are less than 2 people saying goodbye to it. So, easy math here, our world's population is growing by about 2.5 people per second. And as a reminder of this, during this video, I'm going to have 2.5 ping pong balls being thrown at me every single second throughout the entire rest of the video. Who's hitting me in the face every single time? Okay, instead of the balls, we're just gonna do a clock because I get nosebleeds pretty easily and I don't want you to have to see that. So 7 billion people, it's hard to actually get your mind around how many people that is. I mean, if you were gonna just like sit down and count to 7 billion, it would take you like 200 years or something. On the other hand, there is plenty of space for them. If you took 7 billion people and stood us shoulder to shoulder like we were at a Sting concert, those 7 billion people could fit in an area the size of Los Angeles. We can fit on the Earth. There's space for us all. So as long as there's space for us all, what's the big deal about having 7 billion people? Well, it turns out people have been thinking about this for a long time, since around 1800, when the world first clocked 1 billion people. I know what you're thinking, you're like, 1 billion? That's nothing. Hoo-ah. Well, at that time, all the economies in the world were based on agriculture. How much stuff we could grow with human hands, farm animals, maybe a scythe and a wooden plow or something. So that kind of technology, 1 billion people was really pushing it. And the first big time thinker guide to totally have a cow about there just being too many frickin' people was a British economist named Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus calculated that human populations tend to grow exponentially, while the ability of humans to feed each other tends to grow more linearly. And so our growth as a species tends to outstrip our ability to feed everyone. And when that happens, it's pretty obvious what happens. You get the famine and the starvation, and for the people who are left over who don't die of those things, they can get taken care of by disease and war. Basically, Malthus thought that humanity's natural state was to be cruel, miserable, pathetic, and sniveling in a pile of dirty underpants. In his essay on the principle of population, Malthus observed, the vices of mankind are active and able ministers of depopulation. They are the precursors in the great army of destruction, and often finish the dreadful work themselves. But should they fail in this war of extermination, sickly seasons, epidemics, pestilence, and plague advance in terrific array and sweep off their thousands and tens of thousands. Should their success be still incomplete, gigantic inevitable famine stalks in the rear and with one mighty blow levels the population with the food of the world. Diseases also have an easier time taking hold, and of course, starvation can kill off a lot of people as well. Though we did make some pretty good points. As long as humanity is well fed, we're pretty nice lot of people. But I have this problem too. When my blood sugar just gets a little bit low, I start killing all of my neighbor. That's not actually true. When you and your family's lives are threatened by starvation, there's a lot of things that you will do for food, including go to war. However, what Mr. Doom and Gloom didn't predict was the frickin' Industrial Revolution, which not only allowed the production of much more food with far fewer laborers, it was also the impetus for this. What that there is the population of the Earth busting through Malthus's ceiling, and then his atmosphere, and then his ozone layer, and then his mesosphere, and then his... Probably be pretty impressed by this. If you're not impressed yet, just keep staring at it. I can wait. I got all day. It took humanity 50,000 years to go from 0 to 1 billion people, and then to get from 1 billion to 7 billion, about 200. So wow, Industrial Revolution, thank you for allowing us to grow more food using machines and for the fast and efficient transportation that it takes to move all that food around to the people who needed it. And thanks to the medical advances too, which help us understand things like the importance of soap and the way that diseases worked, and as a result, humans now live about 4 decades longer than the average guy in the 18th century. Yeah, Industrial Revolution. So Malthus might have been right about how frickin' stupid it was to be a human if the Industrial Revolution had not happened. So now, the world's population is growing at about 1.1% per year, which is a tiny bit better than the 1.3% per year that got us here. If this current rate continues, by 2050, we should have about 9.3 billion people on the planet. So the question is, at what point are these numbers going to outstrip our ability to feed all of the people on the planet? It turns out, actually, that the question isn't how many people can the Earth accommodate. It's more like how many rich people can the Earth accommodate? Because people in general, they tend to demand stuff for their survival, like oxygen, water, and food. But rich people, we have different expectations. We, for example, in America have a lot of agricultural crops, and we have to use a lot of fresh water to water those agricultural crops. Do you want to take a guess at the #1 irrigated crop in the United States of America? Unless you've heard this statistic before, you were wrong. It's grass. It takes more water to create lawns than it does to create all of the corn in America. We're using it like crazy, though it is a pretty scarce resource. We can use less than 1% of the water on our planet. Most of it is salt water that we cannot use to drink or irrigate crops, and 70% of our fresh water is frozen in glaciers. So clean fresh water, non-negotiable and scarce. So what's next? Food. The world's combined food output could feed around 11 billion people, and yet there are 1 billion people who need food. So yeah, that's one of the most pathetic and infuriating things about our planet. So if there's enough food for 11 billion people, and there's 7 billion people, and 1 billion of them are hungry, who is eating all of our food? Food is eating all that food. A huge amount of the food that we grow in America gets in turn eaten by livestock. It's so hard to say the truth, which is that, but rich people can do what they want. Now when I say rich, it's important to note that I'm not talking about like the 99% versus the 1% rich. I'm talking about if you have running water, electricity that comes into your home, a computer that you can watch YouTube videos on, and regularly can afford to eat meat, you're a rich person on the earth. And you know, sometimes we just have to come to terms with the fact that we, even those of us who don't have it great in America, have it better off than a whole lot of other people. There's a lot of people in the world who don't get that. If you can have a hot shower, that's like the peak of luxury to me. So assuming that you are a first worlder, that you live in a developed country in Europe, or you live in America or Japan, you consume, on average, as much stuff as 32 Kenyans. And now the number of well-off people in the world is starting to increase dramatically and quickly. And this is what we've always wanted for the world. So now we have all these moderately well-off people walking around all over the planet, and it's great, except that they require more. In the meantime, though, a huge percentage of all of the babies that we're talking about being born right now aren't being born to these rich people in the developed world. They're being born in developing nations, and so the population isn't just growing. It's growing in this weird, sort of scary, lopsided way. In fact, as people in a lot of developed countries have kind of stopped having babies. Like Japan, for example. Everybody's like, Japan, what are you doing? Why aren't you having any babies? And Japan's like, I don't know, I don't feel like it. So on average, Japanese are having about 1 baby per household. They're not even replacing themselves, compared to 2 or 3 babies in America, or like 5 or 6 in most of sub-Saharan Africa. So developing nations are having a baby boom, and that's what happens when you get, you know, vaccines and antibiotics and safe water and better sanitation. You get fewer babies dying, and we are all completely and totally in favor of fewer babies dying, I hope. But it also means that there are going to be a lot of new sub-Saharan Africans in the next 50 years or so, and that is where a lot of the 1 billion currently hungry people are already living. So while those of us in the developed world are not having any babies at all, and yet consuming enough food for like 4 truckloads of babies, the governments of developing countries are struggling with where to put all of these new people and how to feed them all. And you also get what is known as a youth bulge. A lot of developing nations are currently seeing a huge explosion in people between the ages of 15 and like 29. And all those youth are out there looking for the same jobs all at the same time, feeling generally hormonal as youth do and being pretty unhappy with their lot in life. Some social scientists conjecture that youth bulges like this have been responsible for nearly every insurrection in history, from the English Revolution in 1640 to the more recent Arab Spring. And neither of those things were bad things, but we should be aware that there may be more of it coming. And another thing that Reverend Malthus never thought of is what happens when humanity gets together and takes over the whole freaking world. Seriously, because it turns out that there are actually supposed to be some other things living on this planet with us. Through our desire for more space and more stuff, we're putting pressure on pretty much every habitat on Earth. So much so that worldwide, 52 species of mammal, amphibian, and bird move 1 category closer to extinction every single year. You know, this world is pretty big, but there's only so much room, and it turns out that Bengal tigers aren't particularly well suited to high-rise living. So the more there are of us, the fewer of literally everything else there is, except for like things that we enjoy eating and petting, dogs and cats as well. Their populations continue to grow. So happy birthday, new people. Welcome to Earth. I'll try not to screw it up too much for you. If you're interested in more things to do with global population, please check out the description below. There'll be links in there for our source materials. You can also ask us questions and leave ideas for future episodes of SciShow in the comments, and get in touch with us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Goodbye.
If you have any questions, please.
Produced by Academic Video Services within the Division of Information Technology at Florida International University.